reality is Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. Tonight, to lead us in dwelling with that question is journalist and cultural critic Touré, co-host of MSNBC's The Cycle, and author of the widely praised book, Who's Afraid of Post-Blackness? What It Means to Be Black Now. Touré was born after Dr. King's assassination and is thus inheritor and beneficiary of his achievement. He is also a public figure and a leader of his generation as our nation moves, we hope, toward a political and cultural reality that is ever closer to Dr. King's dream. Please welcome Touré.
Larry's got me up here speaking after Dr. King and after the mayor. Thanks a lot, Larry. Just fantastic opening group. But thank you, Dallas, for coming out. It's a beautiful city. I've been here several times. And I've been here several times over the last 15 years, and it's happy to see how the city has grown and changed. This building in particular, we were driving up. I didn't know we were coming in here. Like, that building is beautiful. And Larry's like, we're going in there. And when I think about 50 years after the dream and the status of the civil rights movement, I wanted to think about some of the central issues that we are dealing with as a society and some of the central problems that are holding us back as a society, holding Black people back from full actualization in the society. And, you know, King told us that the arc of history bends toward justice, but it surely seems that we are still waiting for the arc to bend all the way around because, of course, we're not dealing with all of the de jure segregation and racism that he was combating, but we have several de facto situations, and indeed in the return of this voting rights battle, we return to the de jure situation that he was dealing with. But some of the central issues that we are dealing with is unemployment, is jobs. The Black unemployment rate is double the white unemployment rate, right? And it has been that way for over 50 years. And we see the chaos that has come to America because of the so-called Great Recession, and people losing their homes and losing their minds, and all these different things that happen when men and women can't get jobs and go into situations of long-term unemployment, and it changes people's lives. Well, Black America has been in a severe recessionary situation for over 50 years. We have lived in that situation for generation after generation. Dr. King called for a march on Washington for jobs and freedom, jobs before freedom, because he knew we needed those things in that order. And the lack of jobs continues to be the center of all our problems. That is the source from whence all other issues flow. We lag in household wealth, which means we cannot help each other when we have a financial problem. We cannot help each other buy homes or start businesses. We lag because so many of us lack jobs, which means that in modern America, there is no intergenerational class mobility. The class that you are born into is almost certainly the class that you will grow up to be in. So if you're born at the bottom, you'll probably stay there unless you hit the genetic lottery, okay, right? And you can shoot a basketball or play football or rap or sing or something. That's not how America's supposed to be. You're supposed to be able to move up in class. That's the way it is in European countries, that you don't move up in class. But in America, it was supposed to be different. That was the promise of America from the beginning. But now we can't get jobs. So many of us get used to not having jobs. And part of the problem, I want to go through a few of the reasons why this is, but part of the problem is that there used to be manufacturing plants in cities, right? I know some of you are old enough to remember this, where a person could get a job at the plant. If you were in Detroit, you could be at Ford or GM. If you were in Seattle, you could be at Boeing or different places. And you could work at the plant for a long time. A lot of Black people would work at the plant, would make something out of themselves. It seems like a blue-collar job, but you could get to a middle-class situation working there. You could make something of your lives, right? This could also in Chicago and Detroit. Part of what happened is globalization, right? And this is what we talk about. We're talking about racism without racists. There's no racist reason why the corporations started moving to other countries. They were making smart financial, economic decisions going to other countries. But what that did was moving factories to China and India and Bangladesh left U.S. workers to have nothing. And, this wasn't about leaving black workers behind, but black workers were disproportionately left behind in this as we transitioned from a manufacturing economy to a service economy where we're all just serving each other. At this point, America doesn't make anything anymore, right? And this is damaging to a lot of us. But we see this everywhere. I know you've seen these Apple print ads where there's a person looking lovingly at some Apple product, and it says, designed in Cupertino. Not made in America, but thought out, conceptualized, dreamed up in California, but made in China. Okay? There was this Saturday Night Live sketch a little while ago that parodied Apple, and they had these sort of Chinese Apple line workers in all white saying, hey, America, what do you make? Is diabetes a product? Which is like not entirely funny, although we kind of have to laugh to keep from crying. But the jobs didn't just leave for Asia. They also left for the suburbs, right? At some point in the last few decades, a lot of companies relocated away from the high rents of the cities, the once dangerous alleys of America's urban centers, and they went to the suburbs. I saw this happen where I grew up. I grew up in a little town called Randolph, which is about half an hour outside of Boston, not that far away from BC. And, I saw when I was in high school, Reebok moved in, right? And this sort of giant glass building where they didn't sell anything was erected. And we saw this sort of giant parking lot where they would fill up in the morning and they would leave in the afternoon. And nothing sold there. It's just a corporate headquarters, and that's fine. That's fine. They're not doing it for a particularly racist reason. But this is, as I said, this is racism without racist, that this is a disproportionate impact on black people because most black people live in urban centers. And public transportation, which a lot of people rely on to get to work, is not constructed generally to go from urban to suburbia, right? It's constructed maybe to go in the other direction or to keep people moving throughout an urban center. But if you have to rely on public transportation to get from an urban center to suburbia, you might be talking about an hour or an hour and a half to get to your job, and that's not sustainable, especially for people with families. So you end up with people who are just not able to get to these jobs, right? And they're more isolated from where the work actually is. We've also seen, and I know a lot of you know about this in your own lives perhaps, the slow death over the last 4 decades of unionization. Unions were a crucial form of protection for all sorts of working class workers, especially black ones. And over the last 40 years, union membership has steadily declined. Unions weren't just for the people in the unions. They improved life for people who actually weren't in the unions because some shops kept paying conditions high enough so that their people would not unionize, right? So they would retain people who would otherwise leave for union protection. So it's not just being in the union that gives you union protection. Now, people didn't just decide to stop being in unions. People didn't just start forgetting all the protections that unions gave them. The rise of modern conservatism worked to crush unions. This was part of how they wooed big business to be on their side. So this is what they were doing in the 70s and 80s, conservatives like Nixon and Reagan, along with various governors. You think about Scott Walker and some other folks courting big business in part by attacking unions and allowing businesses to do things to break unions' backs. So a key protector of the black working class was lost. Add to all of that one more key item, the war on drugs. Richard Nixon declared it, but Ronald Reagan truly put it into effect before the crack epidemic hit America. Nixon understood that the war on drugs had to have a health aspect, right? We have to give people who are addicts a chance to get healthy. to rehabilitate themselves. That was not part of Ronald Reagan's conception of the war on drugs. That was just militarizing the police and attacking the communities where drugs were being used and sold. And his idea was to incarcerate as many people as possible. This at a time when criminologists were explaining that it would be better to incarcerate fewer people because prison itself is criminogenic. Prison itself creates criminals and makes people into more committed criminals, more knowledgeable criminals. It distances them from law-abiding folks. It breaks their bonds with law-abiding folks. It connects them to deviant folks. It breaks down their ability to get work when they reintegrate to society. So, and I'm not saying we should not lock up violent people. Obviously, we should, right? I'm not saying that we should legalize crack and cocaine. Obviously, we should not. But when we're talking about locking up non-violent marijuana users, not sellers, but just users, and we lock up hundreds of thousands of people a year for that crime. We're talking about ruining families, wrecking lives, creating a situation where people can't then go to work, can't become part of the normal work society, and a situation where black and white usage is nearly similar, but the policing of black communities and black people on this issue is far more intense. So young white men, mostly, are able to try marijuana and get away with it, and young black men are not. And so it's not an equal distribution of how we police them, how we prosecute them, how we sentence them, how we incarcerate them. And this is turning a community that could be valuable and contributing to America into one that's shrinking and unable to contribute to America, and it's having a devastating effect on us. And I understand, looking at it almost from a cultural point of view, what Ronald Reagan was trying to do. He was from Hollywood. He wanted to seem tough and strong. He wanted to seem like he was doing battle against a devastating enemy. So internationally, he had Russia as his great dragon, and domestically, he had the violent crack dealer and the lazy welfare queen as his great enemies. And thus, this began the age of mass incarceration, where millions of black and brown men were locked up for nonviolent drug offenses. And most people who we lock up will get out. They will return to their communities. And when they've been in jail for any period of time, then they have to, when they apply for a job, they have to check the box and tell people, I have been convicted of a felony. And then most jobs won't hire you. And we're already behind the 8 ball in terms of hiring, because studies show in hiring, black people are as likely to get a call back as white people who have felonies. Black people without a felony are as likely to get a call back as white people with felonies. Black people with felonies are totally out of luck. But they've got to do something. And when you've got a critical mass of jobless young men, chronically jobless young men, people who know jobs and mobility are hard to come by, some of them are going to go into crime. When someone asks you, what's the matter with Chicago? Why are so many people killing each other in Chicago? Well, the reason why the crime rate is what it is in Chicago, for one example, is that Chicago has the nation's 3rd highest rate of black unemployment. That's the center of the problem. You can also tell them that Chicago is actually not America's most dangerous city, not even close. In terms of per capita, it's only 21st, and the murder rate now is about half what it was 20 years ago. It's gone straight down from about 940 murders a year to 440 murders a year. And last year, Chicago had the lowest murder rate since 1964. So when people tell you, what's going on in Chicago? Chicago is crazy. No, it's not. It's not. The brother who interviewed me for, what was it, the Dallas Morning News said, well, we all know that Chicago has a major. I'm like, whoa, I don't know that. Because criminologists want you to compare cities to themselves. They really don't like it when you compare the crime rate in Chicago to Detroit, to San Antonio, what have you, because these are apples to oranges comparisons, right? There's lots of different factors that go into why Dallas has one crime rate, San Antonio has another, and it's very difficult. But when you compare a city to itself, now you have an apples to apples comparison. And when Chicago has a murder rate half what it did 20 years ago, that says to me that we have a success story. That says to me that we're moving in the right direction. And this idea that Chicago just stays as this heaping problem in America
is bothersome to me because it doesn't fit with the truth. But Chicago is valuable for the right's narrative, which plays off the image of the crack dealer and the welfare queen, and to demonize young black people so as to rally the wagons and to bring white voters home to vote for them on gun control, because you have to protect yourself from the criminal black man who might come into your home at any second. And from the welfare state, why should your hard-earned money be redistributed to lazy criminal black people? And, on immigration, because we can't have, this nation overrun by lazy, possibly criminal Mexicans, and food stamps and Obamacare and all this sort of stuff. Look, I haven't touched on this in this discussion on racism, on prejudice, because I wanted to deal with some more concrete reasons why we have these sort of problems. But, that racism aspect of it is critical as well, of course. But when you have people feeling worthless in society and in their families because they cannot find meaningful work or they can't find any work at all, and they have interactions with the police, with the embodiment of the government that are filled with disrespect, these people who feel rejected by society and see no value in following its rules because they also see the school-to-prison pipeline and they know the odds of escaping it are high, these people may be correctly feeling as though society has passed them by. It has rejected them just as it rejected their dad and their uncle and their brothers, and there's nothing they can do about it because they know there is a matrix holding them down and keeping a critical mass of them out of jobs. The unemployment rate for young black men is near 40%. So they're not getting the entry-level jobs that help socialize you into the workforce. And they need that help. They need those jobs. They need the work that would leave them more connected to country, to manhood, to family, to self. Because a man who can't find work has a hard time feeling purpose, right? And I don't want you to mistake some sexist intention in what I'm saying. Women, of course, need to work to take care of their families, to feel the self-esteem and the dignity that comes from work. But we tell each other that to be a man is to provide for your family. And when a man can't find that ability to provide, he loses the center of what it is to be a man. And he is emasculated virtually. He loses his role in the family. And we have so many black men who can't get jobs because of globalization, suburbanization, unionization, and criminalization. Then they start to wonder, how am I a man? Where and when do I become a man? How do I assert my masculinity on this world? I found this interesting analogy for this whole thing because, some people will point out like, well, Barack Obama did it, and, Colin Powell did it, and, Condoleezza Rice did it, and so what's wrong with, the rest of them? Like, well, this amazing Indian writer from India, Arundhati Roy, sort of broke it down for me in this amazing speech where she explains that modern racism is a system where a handful are able to succeed and then most don't. And it's like the president pardoning a turkey at Thanksgiving. After the presidential pardon, the chosen bird is sent to Frying Pan Park in Virginia to live out its natural life. And the rest of the 50 million turkeys raised for Thanksgiving are slaughtered and eaten. This is modern racism. A few carefully bred turkeys like Barack Obama and Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, Valerie Jarrett, whatever, are given a pass to Frying Pan Park, and the remaining millions are jobless and living in poverty and controlled by institutional racism. Some of the chosen ones work for corporations or government, so who could say that they're anti-turkey? Some of them are on the board of the turkey choosing committee, so who can say that turkeys are anti-Thanksgiving? They participate in it. And as the number of blacks in Frying Pan Park swells, it suggests that racism is over because, look, I can name 5 rich blacks who came from nothing, so if they can do it, why can't you? What is happening, though, is that there is a new civil rights movement brewing. I can see it starting to bubble up, especially in the South. Look at the Dream Defenders in Florida, right? Have you heard about these guys? Young guys battling against Stand Your Ground in Florida. After the Trayvon Martin verdict, they took over the governor's mansion and they sat in there for a month every day, just trying to get people focused on stand your ground. And they're now planning out other things that they can do to dramatize issues like that. There's the Moral Mondays folks in North Carolina who are, sitting in and marching and talking and, being out there protesting against the voter suppression laws that they're doing there. And both these groups are moving about, teaching other people how to do what they're doing. These movements are spreading. And I look at them and I'm inspired. And I believe that grassroots activism can help overturn some of these boulders holding us down. I believe that these are the sorts of movements that can respark another major civil rights movement like we had in the 60s, that can help change the world. And the key problem that they need to deal with is the dearth of jobs, because once we have people who are able to work again, then we will have a revitalized heart of the community. And we can't make the companies return from Asia, okay? America may never again manufacture much beside Hollywood movies. And we can't reverse suburbanization, but we can fight against criminalization. We can fight against the failed war on drugs, which has made the job prospects of millions of young black men and a growing number of young white men more and more difficult, and has contributed to the image of us as druggies and criminals and people who we should not want to help in society. The war on drugs has not depleted the amount, the price, or the quality of drugs, and we are beginning to see the end of it with this movement toward legalization in 2 of our states and decriminalization in others. My governor, Andrew Cuomo, is already working, is trying to implement decriminalization in New York State. And even folks like Rand Paul are saying this current pace of incarceration is non-sustainable. We have to change. We have the President of the United States saying that marijuana use is not any worse than alcohol abuse, right? You saw this quote, right? That he said, it's not, he told the New Yorker that why should we be putting drug users in jail, locking them up, when the people writing the drug laws have done the same thing? We've had 3 consecutive presidents who admitted to smoking weed and grew up to be fairly extraordinary men. And imagine if any of them had been arrested as young men and that had changed the course of their lives and changed the course of history. Well, some things would have been better with the last one, but I'm not going to go down that road tonight. I'm not advocating for all drugs to become legal. I think that would be ridiculous, but we could do the decriminalization of marijuana in America. We could do the cessation of police attacking our neighborhoods and treating us like we're guilty toward proven innocent, and thus breaking our relationship with America and making it harder for us to get jobs and join the fabric of our society and our families. We could do something that brings a new freedom to America to treat your body the way you want to, so that we could treat America to the best that we have to offer from our minds. We can do that in our lifetime and make a significant difference to the culture and the fabric of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Touré, for that aggressive and investigative talk. I mean, it just we're gonna have some discussion about some of those things, I'm sure. So thank you very much for that. I want to introduce real quickly our panelists first before we get started. Over to my far left, Reverend Peter Johnson has been active, I guess the real word is immersed, in civil rights struggle since he was 18 in Louisiana. He was present in Washington, D.C. for Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, and then served on Dr. King's staff and with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in the Deep South before returning to take up the cause of civil rights here in Dallas in '69. And he's just as active today as he ever was, working daily against poverty, homelessness, income inequality, many of those things, Toure, that you were talking about so directly. And we appreciate your being with us, Reverend Johnston. Ms. Lauren Embry is president and CEO of the Embry Family Foundation, just to Pete's right, which has assumed a leading role in the current Dallas Faces Race initiative, primary sponsor of that initiative. She is active on behalf of human rights in many powerful ways, such as her bringing to the U.S., to Dallas, the South African stage play Truth in Translation, about the truth and reconciliation transactions there. She is also executive producer for the documentary Playground, a film on the commercial sexual exploitation of children in America. She received the Women That Soar Award for Philanthropy in Dallas in 2009, and the Embry Family Foundation received the 2009 Angel of Freedom Award from Human Rights Initiative. And then finally, to my immediate left.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
You know, Rick is a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, yeah.
And then finally, to my left is Dr. Angela Ardes. She's assistant professor of English at SMU and specializes in African American literature and culture, 20th century American literature, critical gender studies, and autobiography. Having earned her PhD from Princeton, she is currently completing a volume entitled Affirmative Acts, Political Pieties in African American Women's Contemporary Autobiography. She also has worked for many years as a journalist, writing about the ways Black communities are creating new vocabularies and strategies to negotiate the dilemmas and difficulties of the post-civil rights era. Dr. Angela Ardes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I propose that we go by first names during our conversation. Right?
Good idea.
Since one of us only has a first name, right? But I do want to begin by asking our panelists for reactions to Toure's talk. Angela, can I turn to you first?
Start? Mm-hmm. Well, first I want to thank Larry and the Institute for having me here to be a part of this conversation. I really appreciate Toure's very plain-spoken speech about the ongoing struggles for African Americans. And what I appreciated about it is that I think so often when we think about the civil rights movement and we think about MLK, it's often reduced to a fight for racial equality. And of course, that was central to the work, but there were so many more elements to the movement and its accomplishments. I mean, we know when King died, he was thinking about jobs. He was thinking about the poor people's movement. We know that when he spoke out against the war, there were civil rights people who asked him, well, what does this have to do with Black rights? But he was making that connection between not just racism, but injustice, period. We know that when the energies of the civil rights movement animated what happened in the women's rights movement with LGBT rights. And these are still struggles that we have. And one that I often think about when I am doing my work, and I think about our narratives of the civil rights movement and how we play it in film or in books, we often leave off the Immigration Act of 1965, right? So we had the Civil Rights Act of 64, and we had the Voting Rights Act of 65, and we see these as the culminating moments of the movement. But there was also that Immigration Rights Act that allowed for more Asians to come, more Africans to come, more people from Latin America, which has completely changed our demographics and has brought another issue to the forefront. And so I appreciate in thinking about the movement that we push forward to all these other issues that were embedded in the very elements of its struggle.
Thank you. And now, Pete, it seems to me that many, maybe all of the things that Toure brought up are the things that you find yourself in the middle of.
I'm going to get him for stealing my thunder.
Well, go ahead and get him now for stealing some of your thunder.
Well, first, let me thank you, Larry, and the Institute for being sensitive and wise enough and daring enough to invite me. I would also like to take a minute to commend my mayor, Mayor Rollins, for his leadership when it comes to domestic violence. Mayor Rollins, I can't see you. Well, I can't see you because of the lights, but I want you to know, you will always be very dear to me for standing up against domestic violence in this part of the country. Every year, we go through these programs for Martin King, and each year, I'm asked to participate in programs. What I'd like to do is right quick is share a piece of history with you. I was a national staff member at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, working under Martin King and Andrew Young and those men. My friend Bill Harris, who's sitting down here in front of me, worked for LBJ. Bill talked to Andy Young a couple of months ago and asked Andy about me, and Andy told him that, well, I was firing Peter every 2 or 3 months. It's hard for me to explain to people about those years. When Dr. King was assassinated in 1968, I had just turned 23. Dr. King was killed on April 4th. I turned 23 on March 19th. So all of those years I was around them, I was a teenager. I was mad with them most of those years, and I know they were mad with me. The older I get, the more I realize that, first, if I had $1 for every time Martin King told me to sit down and shut up, I'd be rich. But in spite of my youth, I was paying attention. And in paying attention, the things I learned from being around those men was, first, one of the things that Mayor Rollins talked about that Dr. King really embedded in my heart and in my mind is that we must forgive white America for its behavior and for its treatment. And there's no other way, there's no other solution. I preach this to black people that we have to figure out how to forgive white America, because white America will never be free until we forgive them because they're scared of us. 50 years after the March on Washington, 50 years after the I Have a Dream speech, incidentally, the I Have a Dream speech, on a scale of 100 of Dr. King's best speeches, that wouldn't even be on the list. Yeah? Not only that, at Washington, April 4th, 1968, that was the second time Dr. King delivered the I Have a Dream speech. The only reason he talked about the dream that day, because a big mouth woman named Mahalia Jackson was sitting right behind Dr. King saying, Martin, tell him about your dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream, Martin. Dr. King had a speech that he and Wyatt Walker had wrote that night. They had been up all night working on the speech. Mahalia Jackson and just, Martin, you need to tell him about your dream. So Dr. King stopped the speech, closed the text, and began to tell the world really about his dream. I think that was divine, that Mahalia was there insisting that he tell the nation about his dream. 50 years after that, as a people, Black America, we're in much worse shape today than we were 50 years ago. Yes.
Wow. 50 years ago, or 50 years after the I Have a Dream speech, a lot of what I hear, Lauren, it seems that there is a sort of a seamlessness between civil rights and human rights. And I know that you've been very actively involved in promoting human rights. So what is your reaction to that?
I think what's relevant for me to say right now in the conversation is I'm a native Dallasite. I'm a fourth-generation Texan, and I grew up in a wealthy family, and we had black help from the time I was 3 months old, and I really feel like I was very sheltered from what was happening in the world. I didn't know much of what was happening. It was just I feel like I grew up in the little white world bubble that I walked around in. And when I finally took a human rights class at SMU when I was getting my master's, I felt like my world opened up because I had always had the seeds for human rights, for racial equity, and for gender equity because of experiences in my life. And when I finally learned about really all of the things that had happened in our world, previously, now, and in America's involvement, I must say, in a lot of these things, these atrocities that had been happening around the world, I really was almost angry. I was like, how could that not have been a part of my education? I went to Hockaday, and then I went to SMU. How could I have not really have learned things? Like, really? And because I think as a young person growing up, it would have informed me because I had those seeds within me. I was the type that I hung out in the kitchen when my parents were having parties. The kitchen was a hell of a lot more fun to me than being out there in the party.
It's always where you go in the
Yeah,
party.
I mean, it's always the most fun. Well, that's true, but but anyway, so yes, they're one for me. And I just want to say I totally agree with everything that Touré presented in his speech. And as a philanthropist that's highly engaged out in the world on a national level, I encounter this with all of the foundations, the organizations, and the individuals that we are working with and collaborating with. And these are all issues that, shall I say, the white people, it's pretty much 99% white people of the world that are working on this, really, really care about these issues and really want to work in collaboration and in a collective to try to make change in these areas because it is very real. It is very real.
That's absolutely right. And when we're dealing, where we are as a struggle today is not just in terms of what black people need. It's also what people who are here as undocumented immigrants need. It's what gays and lesbians need. And these are not always the same things, but some of the same tactics are used or some of the same language is often used. And when we're talking about human rights, it's not just, as well as domestic violence sort of things and issues that women need. So the struggle becomes multifaceted, right? And even to what you were saying about 1965 and immigration change, I was thinking about, I believe it's in the early 80s when we started to militarize the border. And they thought that would be sort of an end to the immigration battle. But what it did is instead of people moving back and forth and then not wanting to claim America and not needing things from America because they were seasonal, they were just moving back as they wanted to, suddenly they were stuck in America and they couldn't move back. So then they live here and they need rights and they need values, or they're going to be permanent second-class citizens, which we cannot have. So that locking them in then created the current problem we have where we have 8, 9, now 11 million folks who are undocumented and they need to send their kids to school and they need to be able to go to the emergency room. And you know what? If we legalize them, they will pay more in taxes and they will spend more as consumers. So there's so much value we get out of making them full Americans. And they thought they were closing off the problem and they were just making it worse.
Well, what I wanted to say to that was that they would give more, but they've already given so much.
Sure.
Right? So they're already so much a part of the fabric of our society that they deserve to be made first-class citizens. The second thing I wanted to say that I was thinking about as the both of you were talking is that it's 50 years after the dream, and in many ways, the indicators of our struggle are still as great. Reverend Johnson talked about Martin Luther King saying that we need to learn how to forgive, and I think that's very, very true. But it's also part of the conversation we were having earlier today is that it's important for more to join this conversation, and I'm so glad that Dallas is having this this conference come November. Is that so often it's been the victims of various isms that have been having the conversations, but it's important for men to start talking about domestic violence, more white people to start talking about race in order that we can finally get to the heart of so many of these issues.
Well, one more thing I wanted to add, just a little footnote to the discussion about undocumented immigrants, is that there are small things that each of you can do in your lives. You don't have to become incredible activists like you, sir. Just the language that we use when we talk to our friends about people can start to have an impact. they are not illegal immigrants, because that English construction suggests they are illegal people.
Right.
They are not illegal human beings. There's no way for a person to be illegal. And referring to them in that way immediately sets up a construction that they are wrong and we must do something, and we will permanently judge them by one transgression that they have committed. I mean, do we do that in any other instance? Do we refer to Martha Stewart permanently as an illegal businesswoman? No. She committed a crime, she paid for it, we move on. But when we call them undocumented immigrants, which they are, now we can have a conversation about, well, should we give them documents or not? It doesn't prejudice the conversation. And that sort of language begins to open up the conversation rather than to close it.
I think that relates so much to what the Reverend said. I mean, I think it is fear-based. So what is everyone afraid of? I don't have the answer to that.
Losing power.
Well, losing power, of course, and money, because I think we've turned money into the ultimate importance in our world. It's definitely over humanity, in my opinion. And I think we've got to switch that from the dollar bill back over to human beings being more important than how much we accumulate, because, yeah. We equate value by how much money we have. Yeah. That's how we equate value in our world, I think, in America.
Let me see if I can drill down a little bit here, where we are. And I'm going to quote you briefly from your book, Who's Afraid of Post-Blackness? Do you remember this? You say that the fight, this is your quote, the fight for equality is not over, right? But for your generation, you say, the battle has had to be fought in more nuanced ways. Okay, let's get down and name some of those more nuanced ways.
Well,
that you bring up.
you know, what you guys were fighting for was very tangible. There was segregation.
Yeah, color and white signs was everywhere. So,
Exactly. So it was very clear and obvious what you were fighting against. You know, just as one example of something more nuanced is the glass ceiling, right, that we're dealing with, where you can only get so high in a given corporation because you're not going to hire above that, you know, and or maybe they'll let one get above so that insulates everybody from the discussion of race. And we were talking about the Arundhati Roy turkey analogy. So one gets above, so we can't say, well, you don't let black people up there, but we let one up there to sort of loosen the sort of pressure, and then nobody else gets up in there, right? So, I mean, you know, it's easy to get people to march around segregation. It's very hard to get people to march around glass ceilings, right? You know, or around sort of redlining, you know, or these sort of structural inequality, right? So it's harder to see some of the things that we're dealing with today, which is why, you know, when a Trayvon Martin gets murdered, there's so much energy because, like, this is clear, this is obvious, we can wrap our heads around it, we can feel it, this is tangible. But, you know, other situations, you know, that, you know, I don't know, there's only one black CEO in the entire Fortune 500. Well, that matters, but who's going to march around that?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and these are the things that you call in your book microaggressions.
Well, microaggressions...
Right? No, that's not your coinage, I don't think.
Well, microaggressions is a little different. These are the things that we encounter perhaps on a daily basis, just some small thing that a person might say to you that they may not even realize what they're doing. God, now you got me trying to think of an example of a microaggression.
So
you talk about the resume check.
Well, yeah, I mean, I talk about that in my book a lot because, you know, there's this assumption, I think, sometimes of inferiority, right, that comes from your skin, right? Like when I was first working at MSNBC and I was just a guest all the time, and you know, I was a little younger, I didn't have that many suits, so, you know, and they only generally shoot you from the waist up, so I'd wear like a blazer and a shirt and then jeans, right, you know. And sometimes people would be like, so, you know, where are you from? Like, what organization are you connected to that you would be able to be here with us, right? I just want to know, like, how did you qualify to get in here, right? maybe they're saying it from a good place, or they're just curious. But why are you curious about me when, you didn't ask Ari, and he came in here in jeans and flip-flops practically. But you just assume he belongs. But me, there's just a question. And you see that sort of resume check sort of thing all the time. The black person walking in the white neighborhood, and somebody will stop and be like, well, why are you here? Do you belong here? Do you know where you're going? Can I help you get some directions to get out of here? Those sort of questions that say, we don't understand why you're here. And it happens all the time. My God, I went to this wedding in Arkansas for a good friend of mine, a girl that I had dated, and then, for some reason she dumped me, and years later she married another guy, and I go to her wedding, I'm walking in, and her aunt was like, "Are you the DJ?" I'm like, "No, I'm not the DJ. I could have been the groom. I'm not the DJ."
Pete, you've experienced this kind of thing, haven't you? And worse.
Unfortunately, I have. Let me share a couple of things. First, I want to go back to the problem of immigration. I've made 4 trips into old Mexico to bring mothers back that our nation deported. And of course, I go back to Mexico and bring them back across the border, challenging the government, put me in jail. See how you like that. What we as a nation is doing to families is a sin. Yeah. When little children come home from school and they can't find mama because ISIS picked mama up and put her on a bus and shipped her to Mexico, what we are doing to families is a sin, and God's going to punish us for this. And silence on this issue is a form of cooperation. There's a French philosopher named Henry David Thoreau who wrote that non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as cooperation with good. I don't remember what year we were in Chicago, and Richard Daley Sr. was the mayor. And there had been some violence on the south side and the west side of Chicago. And the mayor issued a statement to the police department that anybody caught throwing a rock or a brick through a plate glass window, shoot them. Well, Dr. King's response to Mayor Daley was that you would think that human beings are more valuable than plate glass windows. And Dr. King went on to tell us that at some point, America had to change from a society where things are important to a society where people are important.
Yes.
And we're a long ways from that. If you think we want to go out there and hit somebody's BMW and see what happened to you.
Lauren, I love it that you said you were in, you didn't mention his name, but it's Rick Halperin, I think, that's his class you were in, because the Dallas Institute's major program in education with the Cowan Center is, we always say, teachers are important. So since that time, since you were awakened like that, have you seen changes for the better? And have you been able to make some?
Well, I think for us what's really important is awareness. And that might sound very basic, but I think it's the seed that gets everything going, because we have so many implicit biases within us, subconscious biases that we have that we aren't even aware of are there. And so we have to build that awareness. We have to start talking about things like this. We have to be real about it so that we can notice it, and then we can start changing within ourselves. And I'll just give an example, because I was in Greencastle, Indiana, one summer, and it's very all-white, and it's a very small university. I was doing a program there for about a month, and I remember I was staying in a house there, a professor's house that was gone for the summer, and I remember looking out my window, and seeing a young black man walking down the street, so his pants were low and he had his hoodie on and cap. And I remember I got a charge. I got a very definite charge initially. But I felt like through taking Rick's class and through going out into the world and learning and talking to people, I was able to notice that I had that charge, and I was able to turn that charge around. So I was able to let it go. So that's one of the things that we're working on, and we want to see change, and that's why we started the Dallas Faces Race initiative leading up to the Facing Race conference, so that we can start having these real conversations, and we can start learning more about our biases that we have within us. Not to say that it's wrong, it's the way that we were acculturated, it's the way we were socialized. I was born in Texas in the 50s. You know, I'm not calling anyone against that. I remember my grandfather having a diatribe and just screaming and yelling that Martin Luther King was going to be having a national holiday every year. You know, but I was able to, you know, I understood of the generation, right? So I do think we're moving forward, but I think that's something that we must do so that these microaggressions, things of that sort, and, you know, I always come really from a gender standpoint as well, too, because women are subjected to so much of that as well.
Absolutely. That's a really powerful observation, right? Because we get those messages about black and brown bodies and the criminality and the assumption of guilt. And that comes in through, you know, the news that we watch and the television shows that we watch, right? The nonfiction and the fiction. And I don't fault you for having the initial reaction any more than I would fault you for seeing, you know, a chocolate sundae and saying, I want that. But that you have the awareness to say, I know where that feeling is, and that feeling isn't right. I have been fed that feeling, just like I walk into the movie theater and I want to eat popcorn because they're blowing that buttery smell at you. And then you realize, like, no, that's wrong. I mean, we talked earlier in the earlier session about...
But to not hold it against
popcorn's
myself.
not wrong, but
to not hold it against yourself.
Popcorn is wrong.
Popcorn is. Yeah, no, you're right. Popcorn is wrong. It's wrong.
With butter on it is.
So good, Angela. But no, we talked in the earlier session about shooter bias, which relates to what you're talking about. That we are far more likely to see a gun in the hands of an unarmed black person than an unarmed white person, right? And this is the reason why we have so many Trayvon Martins, and he's far from the only one, where you see a black person in the distance, someone sees a black person in the distance, they assume criminality, they assume deviance, and they either attack them or call the police about them, and they don't have that secondary reaction that you had of like, wait a minute, why am I internalizing this?
So that's positive. That really is, that level of awareness that continues to grow. Some would reject it, right, but then the awareness is growing. Angela, how do you feel about that aspect?
The awareness that's going?
Do you see it? Do you see a...
I do see it, but I do think that we could have more of it, right? So we are learning that laws can only do so much, as we said before, and that it really is within our hearts that change is enduring, and that comes from everybody being a part of that conversation. So, yes, just having, I hear this often, we obviously need more.
You know, there's another thing I wanted to touch on how we can learn to have more awareness, like you're talking about. Are we recording this? Is there a video camera recording this? Yes?
What are you about to do?
No, I wasn't going to do anything, and I was going to say something. I wanted to go too far. But you know, sometimes people watch Fox News and they get the wrong opinion about the world. They get misinformed about the world. If we could decrease that, then we would have more awareness of reality.
Yeah.
I'm with ya. I'm with ya.
Yeah.
Now, I want to bring up something that you brought up in our teen symposium this afternoon when we had a beautiful room full of young people there.
Yes.
And you talked about the difference between changing laws and changing hearts. And you just brought that up, Angela.
It was a tremendous debate inside the civil rights movement. There was constant struggle and tension between the students that I was a part of And the senior men, Martin King and Wyatt Walker and Fred Shuttlesworth, they were men, pastors of churches, married with families. We were college students. So obviously I guess our sense of militancy was completely different than their sense of militancy. And I was talking to you all earlier about how naive we were in 1963. In 1963, I was 18 years old, freshman in college, and our position was, the students, let's take the summer of 1963, straighten out this problem of race in America so we can all go back to college. Yeah. And of course, we thought that changing the laws, eliminating the segregated signs and changing the laws, that would solve America's problems. Martin King told us in no uncertain terms, the laws that America have that oppresses us are an external manifestation of an internal problem of the heart. That unless we do something about the heart of white people, changing the laws is a waste of time. Now, of course, here again, at 18, 19 years old, I was convinced I had more sense than Martin King. And I often wondered why they was always telling me to sit down and shut up. Since I have this opportunity, and my mayor is here, Mr. Mayor, that every year Dallas has 2 major Martin Luther King parades, and I would be interested to know how much it cost. But I'm saying this because, do y'all know why we went to Memphis, Tennessee in 1968? To help garbage workers. Garbage workers. Dr. King died fighting for garbage workers. Dallas, the lowest paid garbage workers of a major municipality in America is in this city. Take the money that you're wasting on foolish parades and invest it in people.
And it's still all black men mostly.
Oh, it's
still all black men, all
99%
mine are
black
black.
men. Yeah. And they don't have no benefits because the city came up with this upside down cockamamie idea that they don't work for the city, they work for a temp agency, you see.
So we can see why Dr. King said, sit down and...
No, I don't think so. I say keep talking.
Because you can get right passionate. You're acting from the heart.
And sometimes they would put me out the room. Well, you get up and get out the room, Peter.
In fact, you said that the first of those more than 100 times you were sent to jail was for swapping white and colored signs in Louisiana somewhere, right?
Yeah, you can't distinguish the difference between colored drinking fountains and white drinking fountains, so all I done was switch the signs around. It seemed like a good idea at the time.
I want to turn us a little bit here and go to your book, Touré, and quote something else from it. The name of it is Who's Afraid of Post-Blackness? How to Be Black in America Now. Okay? And so here's a quote. If words were people, post-black would not be a celebrity. Not yet. Few people know him, and some of those who know him don't understand him. Some people are thrilled he strolled into the collective mind, but some are a little scared of him. He has the air of a radical who wants to shake things up. And when someone arrives proposing major changes to your world, that can be frightening. But relax. His mission is spiritual liberation. Can you expand upon that quote? Talk to us a little more about what you mean by post-blackness.
Sure. I mean, the idea was about giving people the freedom to perform or embody blackness however they wish. And, it's not really something that you can leave or lose, or encountered certain people who seem to feel like, blackness was like milk, and the hood was like the refrigerator, and the longer the milk was outside of the refrigerator into the middle class, the upper class, then the more spoiled the milk would get. And like, no, it doesn't work like that. You can go to Harvard and remain black. You can live in Beverly Hills and remain black. You can go do yoga or scuba diving or these sort of things that black people don't do. And it doesn't like challenge your blackness or whatever. I'll tell you a story that opens the book that sort of tries to get at this concept. Because I didn't create this term. Thelma Golden and Glenn Ligon. Glenn Ligon's a major artist. Thelma Golden is a major curator. They were putting together a show in New York City, and Thelma was trying to wrap her head around these artists she found, these black artists she found, who wanted to have their art represent blackness when they wanted it to, and then they wanted it to represent whatever they wanted it to later. They didn't have to always make black art. You can see some of this if you think about the work of Romare Bearden, which is amazing, and he's one of my favorite artists of all time. But his work almost always represents something about what it means to be black, as opposed to Jean-Michel Basquiat, some of his work talks about what it means to be black, and some of it does not. And so that's more of a post-black conception that maybe I'll deal. It's a part of me. It does not swallow me up, and it doesn't constrain me. So the story: I was in Florida. I used to do this show. This George Plimpton type show called I'll Try Anything Once, where they had me go out and do all this crazy shit, okay? And so they had me in Florida going to go skydiving, and I had never been skydiving before. And, as I was on my way there, we went to some Wendy's type place, and there were a couple black guys there. And the whole rest of my crew is white, and the black guys are like, well, what are you doing here in the middle of Florida? And I'm like, well, I'm going skydiving. And the guy goes, brother, black people don't do that. And then he looks at the whole rest of the crew I'm with, and they're all white, and he looks at them and like, see? I'm like, okay, all right. So we go up in the plane, and 14,000 feet, I jump out, and I'm falling, and it's insane. If any of you have ever been skydiving, first time you go, it's insane. Your mind cannot process what's happening, so you're just out of your mind. But then you pull the cord, and you're floating incredibly slowly, and it's incredibly peaceful, and I can see, the sun in the clouds, and I can see, the ocean, and I can see, the fields, and just having that perspective of, at 5,000, 6,000 feet up and floating down really slowly, made me feel incredibly humble and incredibly small and just like a speck in the universe. And it gave me this sort of relationship with God that I had not quite had, right? I was not an atheist, but I wasn't all the way certain. I don't think I had a very present relationship with God in my life. And having that perspective on the earth, it made me feel really small, made me feel there must be somebody in control who is above us, who is orchestrating this whole gigantic thing that we're doing. And getting that relationship with God is something that nobody would ever tell me I should not get and I should not have. And that is something that I would have missed out on if I had said black people don't skydive. I went up there and I got a better, I think my humanity was fundamentally changed. That in doing this thing, now, if I had decided to, I would have started going to a Baptist church in Brooklyn, right? And so performing it in this sort of black way. Now, I didn't need that, but if I had cut myself off from this human activity, because black people don't do that, I would have missed out on a chance to grow. And that's what I'm talking about with post-blackness. Like, do whatever you want to do and be whoever you want to be. And then, now also it would have been absurd because there was people like the 555th paratroopers who jumped out of planes in World War II hundreds and hundreds of times. So, the idea that black people don't do that is also absurd. Everywhere you go, from Antarctica to the bottom of the ocean, there's some other black person who's already done that. There's no more Jackie Robinsons to be found. You're always going to be Larry Doby, right? You're going to be the second one. So that's what I'm really trying to exhort people to do. Be whoever you want to be. Do whatever you want to do.
And Angela, this really is a major focus of your work, this kind of thing, post-civil rights movement as strategies or ways to be.
Right, it is key. And I love the concept behind post-Black and what it means. I'm not crazy about the term because I wonder, we don't ask people to be post-Russian or post-Jewish. You know, in order to more embrace my humanity, I don't want to have to leave my culture behind. But I love post-Black in terms of how it's asking people to push beyond the boundaries of Blackness. It's a little tricky, taking a term from the arts world into society at large, into politics, because we do need new ways to think about Blackness. We need language for gender and class and ethnicity and all these, and sexuality and all these other issues, things that we normally don't talk about often when we talk about Blackness. But sometimes in politics, it seems like, will a political post-Blackness have the same kind of individualism of a cultural, artistic post-Blackness? And where does that leave us in terms of collective struggle?
Well, I think that's absolutely true in terms of the politics. I mean, for the most of the white groups you outlined, there's no constriction internally or externally on what it means to behave as a white person in America, right? I think
I agree.
Jews have a similar cultural struggle to Black people, so putting them aside. But, you know, there would be no need for post-whiteness or post-Russian or post-Italian because nobody says they can't do anything, right? Now, politically, yes, we are getting into murky sort of water when you have somebody like Barack Obama who can say, well, you know, it wasn't only Black people who elected me. My power does not come from being a Black person or from the Black community, so I'm going to perform politically however I want to. And in the first term, we felt quite often abandoned by him. You know, in the second term, it's been a lot different in terms of defending affirmative action and changing mandatory minimums and sort of starting to chip away at the war on drugs. It's been a lot different. And some of the things we were talking about before in terms of the reform of Obamacare, for one example, has a disproportionate impact on Black and brown people, which is why Black people have been far more supportive of Obamacare from the beginning than white people have.
Pete, what was your reaction to President Obama's election?
Oh, I will. But let me say this I got some partners in Bedford-Stuyvesant. I'm going to ask them to pray for you here. In Bed-Stuy. For me, the night that President Obama was elected, I had been invited to a Democratic watch party that night. Huge, huge watch party, probably 2,000 or 3,000 people there. And it had not registered with me until I was brought up on stage to say a couple of words. And as I stood before that mic, my mind began to, I began to think about Rosa Parks. And my wife was over here, and Johnny Carr. Johnny Carr and Rosa Parks, two ladies that grew up together from the first grade, best friends. From the first grade to the 12th grade. Two great, great, tremendous ladies. And I began to think about Ralph Abernathy and Bernard Lee, and and Martin King, and you just suppose Miss Parks could see this. So I began to weep. It made me cry. That a unique piece of history. There were more white people to die in the civil rights movement than Black people. A lot of folk don't know this. We lost more white people and Jews than we lost Blacks in the civil rights movement. And I began to think about Andrew Goodman and Micah Sherner, who lost their lives down in Mississippi. Kids came down from New York to hang out with us that summer of '64. And James Reeb, a young white boy from Boston who came down to Selma and lost his life. Viola Luso, an Italian lady from Detroit, came to Selma, and the Ku Klux Klan shot her in the head one night on the highway. So for me, it was bittersweet that in spite of all of that, you know, we were still looking at the first man of color to be able to go to the White House. So very painful, but I guess joy in my heart also that night. Yeah.
I was fixated on my son. He's 3 months old. It's like the world that you are going to grow up in is going to be entirely different. And he watches MSNBC, and that's Barack Obama, and I mean, he knows, I mean, just have him see the most powerful man in the country as a black man is just transformative for him, I think.
Yeah. Lauren, do you remember what your reaction was?
When Obama won
Obama
election?
was elected. Yeah.
Excitement. I was really, really happy because I felt like we could move forward to some change that was needed in the world. And I just firmly believe every individual, no matter who they are, should be afforded equitable opportunity to succeed and to live their passions in life. And so I felt like this was an example of the beginning of that, or a path to that future. I think we're very, very far from that in many, many ways. But I think, having these conversations, having gatherings, having people really speak openly about what we're up against and getting, like I said, real about it. We really have to talk, real and understand others' experiences and have the empathy in that way and walk in other shoes and hear the stories, and be open to listening to each other. That's how I think we're going to get there. I think it's one of the main factors. But I think as you're speaking about the post-blackness, I think individually, that's what we all need to do in such contexts, is get ourselves out of the boundaries that we put upon ourselves.
Yeah,
that would be much more gender for me than race, definitely. Sure. But I really think that's just an important point for all of us as we move forward in life, to really look at our boundaries. Yeah.
Angela, were you going to say something?
Was I going to say
No,
something?
I thought you were.
No.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm looking at our time, and it's running out. So I want to make the most of these last few minutes we have together. Again, from your book, Touré, which, by the way, taught me so much, and I would recommend it to anybody.
Yes, it's great.
And by the way, you will be signing books in the lobby afterward. You didn't pay me to say that, did you?
No, I didn't.
You didn't.
But thank you.
But you will be signing books in the lobby. So here's what you say. You write of living in the shadow of what might be considered Black America's greatest generation. Well, that's saying a lot, right? Because there's not going to be another greatest one. That was it. Partly embodied in
Absolutely.
somebody sitting on this stage. You also say that as a person, I'm buoyed by the courage and determination of our legendary freedom fighters. People who fought through levels of adversity I'll never have to battle. Those blacks opened doors for me, so how can I not honor their victories with my own resolve and steely determination? So what is the proper way to honor Dr. King? Now, Pete says it's not through parades.
No, with the seriousness of purpose and how you approach your life and what you do with your life. Because there were people who died for me, just for me to be able to go to school with white kids, for me to be able to go to the college that I chose. I went to college in Atlanta. I'm sure there was a fairly recent time when that would not have been possible. For me to be able to work at CNN and at MTV and then at MSNBC. There are people who came before me who showed great dignity and professionalism to where folks said, oh, wow, look at Carol Simpson, look at Max Robinson, look at some others. Like, oh, wow, they, Brian Gumbel, they can do it too. And so, especially at MSNBC, I approach what I do with great seriousness because I owe these other folks, and the responsibility is very tangible. The folks who paved that way are right there. They're very close to me. They live among me. And, I think about it all the time. And, there was a day when this sister in Detroit had been killed, and it was her funeral, and we had not discussed it on the show at all. And if you guys haven't watched my show, on the final 3 minutes of every show, each of us, there's 4 hosts, each of us gets to talk about whatever we want to talk about. We call it a rant. I have Monday and Friday because I pitch the show. So it was Friday. It was her funeral at 11 a.m. And I said, I want to talk about that. And they said, like, well, why? What? Who? Really? Like, nobody's heard of this person. And I'm like, I don't care how much I have to fight with you, but this is what I'm doing today. Because this is something that I can do. I can advance this story, make sure that more people know about what happened to this girl, and the man hasn't even been arrested at that point. That's how I can use the power, the small amount of power that I have, and pay back the folks who allowed me to be here.
And at the same time, living your singular life as you feel called to live it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Those two
Absolutely.
things.
No, I mean, I can feel a responsibility to the past and bring that to my work, the things I write and what have you. At the same time, I go to yoga. I used to. I don't go to yoga so much anymore, but I did for years. I was almost always the only black person in the room. But that did not matter. My wife is not black. For some people that bothers them. That does not matter. That's who that I love. There are other things that I do that I'm sure a lot of other people be like, well, I don't do that. That's how I choose to live, and I get a lot out of it.
Yes. Angela, what about you? How do you think the best way would be to honor?
For me, it is to think that Dr. King's work in the end was really about fighting injustice. And I remember when I grew up here in Dallas, and on Sunday mornings, before Joe Bagsby's show came on, there was a radio program called Martin Luther King Speaks. And it would play the different speeches of Dr. King, and not just I Have a Dream. And the speech I always loved was the drum major instinct, right? And it was like, what I want to leave behind is a committed life, and I want people to say that I was a drum major for justice. And so in the end, if we think about justice and all the different facets that we've talked about it today, I think that's the way of paying the highest tribute to Dr. King.
Great. Lauren, what about you? Can I ask you that same question?
Yeah, sure, definitely. Continually and always working to make this place, this world, a better place for all people. And coming from that connection of head and heart, and understanding that a lot of people have gone through a lot of trauma. So also trying to bring forth healing to our world as well, through that love and building of community.
And to go back to the word that you introduced into our conversation, for that to happen, we need awareness, right? And we need to
I believe that to be true, yes.
And that includes knowing, we were talking earlier at the Teen Symposium about those young people quoting from Letter from Birmingham Jail or from the I Have a Dream speech, to continue to read and study and look at those things from year to year. Yeah, awareness. I'm glad you brought that word in.
Thank you for doing this every year.
Thanks. And Pete, what about you? What do you think is the best way to honor Dr. King and
Well, surely it's not with parades and.
Well, we know what you think is not
Money in the
honored.
right place.
Yeah, but let me respond by giving you a piece of history and kind of an insight look at us right after Martin's assassination. And I don't remember what year this was, but maybe 1970, 1971. We met in Kansas City at Emmanuel Cleaver's church. Emmanuel Cleaver was mayor of Cleveland. He's a United States congressman today. And we met in Kansas City to discuss what to do about Dr. King's legacy. And we argued and really wrestled with whether or not we should work to make his birthday a national holiday. There were the young men that I was a part of, we thought we ought to make his assassination day a national holiday because we felt that we needed to force America to deal with the bloodshed and the hatred on an annual basis, and that a birthday holiday would become a joke in the nation, and we would forget who Martin Luther King really was and what he stood for and what his legacy is. Now, Dr. King, all we know about Martin Luther King is he told us that he had a dream and he helped the colored people. That's about all we know about Martin Luther King today. And then there were those of us who felt that we didn't need to ask America to give Dr. King a holiday. We could declare that ourselves, and we didn't need America to do this. But the senior men that was older than us, much more mature than us, felt that first it would be unfair to Coretta and those little children if they had to face Dr. King's assassination every year. They were right. That would have been unfair to do that to Mrs. King and to Dr. King because they were little children at the time. But we were right in saying that a birthday holiday in America is going to become irrelevant regarding Dr. King's true legacy, and that has happened. The fact that we talk about Martin Luther King, but we don't talk about guns. The parade Saturday had members from the ROTC in the parade honor Martin Luther King. Think about this. Here was somebody who was absolutely against militarism, preached against it, wrote about it, and you would have a parade honoring Dr. King with soldiers in it. He would tell the soldiers the same thing Isaiah said through God, put your guns down, baby. So I would think that for me, we have to be careful and not allow Dr. King to be Americanized into some little Boy Scout.
Thank you, Pete.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I was just going to say the man that died in Memphis, Tennessee wasn't the man who led the Montgomery bus boycott. Two completely different men. Dr. King evolved, Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. You're our guest of honor, Touré. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and I want to give you the last word. Put you on the spot and ask you this, are we closer to the dream?
We were just talking about this on the show today, that we are still dealing with voting rights, still dealing with poverty, still dealing with war. Some of the du jour challenges that King faced are not with us anymore. But there's still some significant differences, some significant hurdles to get over. And, it's at this point in the meme that we have to say things are much better and we have progressed tremendously. It's just, which I hate that we have to say that. And we acknowledge that. But I think I hate that because it takes away from that we have so much more to do, to deal with inequality, to deal with poverty, to deal with implicit bias. And it's so easy to rest on progress and the fact of, we finally elected a black president, so clearly we have gotten to the mountaintop, done. And no, that has led to greater division than we have ever had.
That's right. Disparity's the worst it's ever been.
We went backwards. I don't know. Closer, I don't know. We have to figure out what metric and, what chart we're dealing with closer, but we still have more work to do.
Well, let's agree to meet back here at some time in the future and check it again.
All right.
Let's keep working.
All right.
Torrey, thank you, and thank you, panelists, for an important discussion that the Dallas Institute is going to continue on February 26th when we have a follow-up program to this one, and you'll be hearing about it, and I hope you're interested in it. So thank you all for being here tonight. It was a privilege to have you. Good night.